Hello, fellow music nerds. Welcome back to Music Makers and Soul Shakers. I'm your host, Steve Dawson, coming to you from the Hen House Studio in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a guitarist, songwriter, and producer originally from Vancouver, Canada. I love all aspects of making records, so I thought I'd make a podcast and bring in a slew of folks who've also made records in one way or another and yak about it with them. Each month I'll be bringing you an in-depth conversation with a new guest. It may be a musician, a songwriter, a producer, or an engineer, but each of these people will have a fascinating story to tell about their lives and their involvement in the process of being a music maker and or a soul shaker. Thanks for joining me, and feel free to reach out to me through the podcast website at www.stevedawson.ca. And now, here's another episode of Music Makers and Soul Shakers. Hey there, fellow music nerds. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining me for the podcast Music Makers and Soul Shakers. It's an honor to be here bringing you an episode this month with the great songwriter Billy Bragg. First of all, I would just like to thank Joe Henry, who is responsible for introducing me to Billy Bragg and helping to tee up this interview, which is much appreciated. Thanks, Joe, if you're listening. And if people have not heard the episode with Joe Henry from a couple of years back now, seems weird, please go listen to that. It's a big, epic two-parter, and it's one of my favorites. Anyway, thanks, Joe. And it was a real honor to speak with Billy Bragg. He's got a lot of facets of his career that I find really interesting. His songwriting has always been the focal point, I guess, of his career, although there's so many things that he does really well that I've always been drawn to about him. Interestingly, his latest project is a book that I highly recommend, and it's called Roots, Radicals, and Rockers, and it's a history of skiffle music in Britain. For those of you who don't know what skiffle music is, I'm not going to give you a history lesson right now, but essentially it's kind of a street blues, early rock and roll, and it was the kind of music that was being played around Britain by people like Lonnie Donegan. He was the big famous one, but there was a lot of other guys who brought traditional jazz and blues music to a popular audience in Britain in the 50s. Lonnie Donegan was a huge influence on John Lennon and the Quarrymen and the Beatles, of course. So the influence of skiffle music is gigantic, especially because of that well-known connection and influence on the Beatles and John Lennon. And Billy decided to write a book about it, which is really interesting because he wasn't even born when skiffle was happening. So it wasn't like a direct connection. He just thought it was a cool story. And the book is amazing. He's done some really deep research into the history of skiffle, how it came from North America, and sort of the background of the railroads and what was going on in America at the time. Anyway, go read it. It's really cool. It's called Roots, Radicals, and Rockers. So get that. Also, his latest couple of records are really deep, rich, beautiful recordings. Again, the Joe Henry connection. Joe has produced a couple of things recently for Billy. One of them is an excellent record called Tooth and Nail. That I think that was their first collaboration together. It's a beautiful record. It's just a really interesting progression of an artist into kind of a new sound and direction and approach to writing and singing that seems to be coming from a different place than some of his earlier recordings were. So go check that record out. They also did this cool album called Shine a Light a couple of years ago, where they did all these traditional kind of bluesy railway songs, and they traveled on trains across the states and got off at various stations and recorded the record in train stations. And you can hear the trains going by and the conductors yelling and all this stuff. It's great. I'm not going to give you a history lesson on Billy Bragg. He's made some incredible records. I got to kind of know him, or his music anyway, through seeing him at festivals over the years. And what I always dug about seeing him was that you could really tell that he kind of came from the street, like the way that he projected and the way that he played. He was super aggressive, and you could tell that he'd really worked that from just really starting from scratch and figuring out how to, make yourself heard above, whether it's on the street or in a punk rock club. He was sort of a one-man wrecking crew, and he would perform under the name Spy vs. Spy, and he had like a portable PA system that he'd kind of strapped to his back, and he played this really kind of raunchy guitar style that I love, really kind of gnarly guitar sound. And he would just write these really politically charged songs, and it just had this really great do-it-yourself punk rock ethic that you can really kind of relate to today in today's musical climate. Anyway, he went on to have a lot of commercial success as well. He had a number of hits throughout the years, songs like Sexuality, and there's a song called A New England that was a hit for Kirsty MacColl. So he's had his fingers in all that. And then a big project in the last 20 years has been this whole thing that I'm sure a lot of you know, where he has collaborated with Wilco and Nora Guthrie, Woody Guthrie's daughter. And she has opened up the vaults of Woody Guthrie's extensive lyric writing, turned them over to Billy, and let him sift through them and curate them and bring them into the recording studio. And Billy wrote some music for the lyrics that were there, provided by Woody Guthrie, which is amazing. So he collaborated with Wilco on 3 volumes of music that are called Mermaid Avenue, Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3. Okay, if you need any sort of crash course on Billy Bragg, go listen to Life's a Riot. That's the first Spy vs. Spy record that he made in the early 80s sometime. Talking with the Taxman about poetry is awesome. Plus all that new stuff I just mentioned. Go feast your ears on some Billy Bragg. Oh, and one last thing before we get going here, since I'm talking about Woody Guthrie, I want to let you know, I met this person at a festival I played at last weekend, and she runs the Woody Guthrie Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And man, this place looks so cool. I have not been there, but it's become very high on the list of places that I want to visit. She totally sold me on it, told me all about it. Go look at the website for the Woody Guthrie Center. If you find yourself anywhere near the area, or if you live anywhere near the area of Tulsa, Oklahoma, do yourself a favor and go and check that place out. All right then, let's do this. Here is this month's episode of Music Makers and Soul Shakers. I just wanted to say I've been reading your book. I picked it up about 3 or 4 days ago, and man, I just love the book so far. I'm not all the way through it, so don't
wish to be rude, Steve. Which book?
Oh, the Roots, Radicals, and Rockers one.
Oh, cool. That's my 3rd book. It gets a bit confusing.
Oh, okay. So I'm not too up on your writing history then, because this is the first one I've read of yours, and I'm just blown away by the historical detail side of it. I was wondering if we could just talk a little bit about that, because...
Sure. No worries. I mean, give you, with respect, it's the first one to be published in America, so
okay.
It's understandable you might not have heard the other 2.
So, yeah, could you tell me a bit about, just the historical detail side of it is so gripping and in depth. Is that the first nonfiction you've written?
No. The first book I wrote was called The Progressive Patriot, which was about something nefarious that we call Englishness, and what it means, and why I feel I'm a patriot myself, although I'm a person of the left.
Yes.
Second book was an annotated lyrics book, about 30,000 words of me explaining what some of the lyrics to the songs were about.
Okay.
And the Skiffle book is the 3rd.
So the whole Skiffle thing, that's kind of the generation before you was the one that got caught up in the Skiffle craze. So what's your connection to the whole Skiffle thing? Is that something you were really into as a kid? You were growing up in the 70s and 60s and 70s, and Skiffle had already ended by then. So what's your connection?
Yeah, I was born in peak Skiffle, 1957. So
okay.
I was completely missed the whole thing.
Yeah.
But my connection is punk rock.
Okay. And
it's almost the same thing as Skiffle, just 20 years later, and with better haircuts, and much better guitars. But having lived through punk rock as a music that was fundamentally do-it-yourself, self-empowering, rejecting the mainstream, the more I learned about Skiffle, the more I realized it was very, very similar to what I had experienced. The same sort of things, the DIY, the turning their back on what was being handed to them by the BBC, the self-empowerment aspect of it. You don't need to be a musician to play music thing, a trained musician anyway. So all those kind of things were I experienced during punk, and I thought that skiffle has such little respect in the UK that really perhaps it should be as respected as punk rock. So why don't I try and explore that and see if I can make a case for that argument?
Don't spoil the ending, even though, because I haven't got.
You'll never believe where it ends.
No, like, but I got so caught up, like even in the first chapter, because you start talking about the whole history of Leadbelly and the railroads and all that stuff. Like, what kind of in-depth research did you have to do to dig into all that stuff? Because it's really like interesting, and I had no idea about any of that.
Well, it's something I'm interested in as well. I mean, a lot of it was the discovery for me. I mean, the first half of the book really is about the trad jazz boom in the UK in the post-war period, which I knew next to nothing about.
Really?
I had to write an entire chapter about New Orleans jazz and why it's important. Again, not something I knew a huge amount about. Uh-huh. So it was a journey of exploration for me too, and I tried to write it in very much in the perspective of someone coming from a rock and roll background, and don't imagine that anybody reading this knows anything about trad jazz, because I certainly didn't.
Okay.
So when I'm talking about the key impulse of trad jazz, as it was popular in the UK, was a rejection of the mainstream jazz music of the day, which broadly speaking was swing.
Yeah.
So it was big bands, crooners, and a lot of guys in the UK felt that was somehow divorced from the original spirit of jazz, and that spirit had remained in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to get back to that kind of raw, original sound that jazz had, that exciting sound from the first decade of the 20th century, because they believed that the mainstream stuff was overblown. So in many ways, they were doing exactly what the Ramones were doing in 1974, 75, when they were looking at.
It really sounds familiar.
When they were looking at mainstream guitar rock and thinking it was bloated and, totally divorced from what had gone before, they went back to basics in order to renew the spirit of guitar music. In my country, Dr. Feelgood did more or less the same thing.
Right.
And they both the Ramones and Dr. Feelgood were precursors of punk. So, that perspective was absolutely crucial to me, trying to explain trad jazz and the importance of trad jazz and how it led to skiffle to an audience that had grown up on guitar rock like I had.
Right. And were you exploring that music and stuff? Like, had you got into Leadbelly and stuff? Like, I know probably through your Woody Guthrie in-depth diving, you've probably come across a lot of Leadbelly, but was it something that you were exploring as well at the time? Like, because he plays a big role.
Yeah, I was kind of up to speed on Leadbelly, I think.
Yeah.
But really, the way I wrote the book, I actually wrote the first chapter last.
Oh, okay.
In writing terms, I started at chapter 2 with Bill Collier being the godfather of skiffle.
Yeah, he's an interesting sounding character, and that whole thing.
He's a very interesting character.
Yeah.
But so when I'd written the book, I had to go back to the start to try and set the scene. Uh-huh. And in order to do that, I felt I had to write some biographical detail about Leadbelly.
Yeah. Why
he was an important figure because I would argue that Leadbelly is the greatest folk singer America ever produced, mm-hmm. because he's the kind of nexus for so many different styles of music. To call him a blues man is to really undersell what he did.
Totally.
And he is right on the cusp between being known and being unknown, where folk music becomes something that we have no idea of. And then in the story of the song Rock Island Line and where it came from, there's a really interesting story there about how a song becomes a folk song, a song that was originally written by a guy whose name we know, for a purpose we know, suddenly hardly 20 years later, is being recorded as a prison work song, in inverted commas, in Arkansas. So that was a really interesting story there, I felt, to tell that story. And then on top of that, so many people know the song Rock Island Line, but very, very few people, myself included before I wrote the book, know actually where Rock Island is and why it was significant in the history of American Railroad, where they first built a bridge across the Mississippi.
Yeah, you had me looking at Google Maps on that because I was like, man, that sounds like a cool place.
Yeah, so it's really about archaeology. You kind of hit a vein, and you just keep following the clues that have been left there by people like Leadbelly and John A. Lomax and the people who did the research into the songwriting for the Rock Island Line Railroad itself.
Yeah,
and then the history of Rock Island, because I came to the conclusion in the writing of the book and in looking at the history of American Railroad that the way that the railroad affected America was unlike any other invention that has been. Whatever the cars and airplanes did, they only really built on what the railroads had already started.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time, that's for sure. And I like how with that song in particular, there's like legend and there's kind of like fiction that got added onto it, stuff about the toll bridge that wasn't actually there and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah, I mean, the whole story of the song is strange as well. The fact that it's the first track on Johnny Cash's first record.
Yeah.
And he sings Lonnie Donegan's version. He doesn't sing Leadbelly's version because Leadbelly doesn't have a toll booth in his version. It's Donegan who first mentions this ridiculous toll booth. There never was a toll booth on American railroads, by the way. It's a complete invention by Donegan.
Right.
Probably because he was trying to make sense of what Leadbelly was saying, because it's not clear on all the recordings exactly what Leadbelly's talking about when he's describing this discussion that went on. So Donegan assumed that the way that the train driver had fooled the signalman was by fooling him by not paying some kind of a fee. Uh-huh. He assumed that. Actually, if you do listen to Leadbelly's versions, you can understand that the signalman is asking the train driver to go in the hole, which means in a siding, so that an express train can go by. But if you have livestock, you get exempt for that on animal rights grounds. So that's how the guys fooled him by saying, I've got all livestock, and then so he says you can carry on, and then he says, I've got pig iron. I think
as he's pulling out, sucker.
Might be a pun. Leadbelly might put a little pun in there by saying pig iron, but so it and so also that's tied up in all this as well, Steve, is the kind of way this song has ping-ponged them back across the Atlantic a couple of times, and the story of how African American roots culture could influence white kids in Britain in 1954, 55 is equally an untold story. So a lot of the story I was telling hasn't really been properly put into its context in my country, never mind in your country. And so that's what I was trying to do. I don't think you can't really, I would argue again, music journalists might disagree with this, but I don't think you can write about music without writing about context.
Totally. And I mean, Lonnie Donegan to me, like as a music fan, was always just kind of a footnote of the Beatles story. Like there's never like been something that really talked about him and his, like what made him come out in that era and that time and be as popular as he was.
Well, exactly. That's the problem. All the references to Skiffle and Donegan in the literature are all in the context of 1960s British rock stars.
Right.
And they have a couple of pages in their biography to explain what Skiffle is and Donegan. But all those writers, probably through save time and all the understandable reasons, treat Rock Island Line and Lonnie Donegan having a hit with it in 1955 as a singularity. It just kind of happened out of nowhere. One of the things I'm most proud of in the book is that Rock Island Line doesn't get in the charts till chapter 13 in a 26-chapter book in the middle of the story. So that's that was a happy accident, but I'm really pleased about that.
Yeah. So as a kid growing up when you did, were you aware of American folk music, or were you just sort of focused on what was going on in Britain at the time?
Depends what you call folk music.
Well,
I initially listened to a lot of singer-songwriters. I was a big but I was 11, I really got into Simon and Garfunkel. Bridge Over Troubled Water came out that year and was all over the radio, particularly The Boxer.
Oh, yeah.
And through listening to that, I kind of got into Bob Dylan by the time I was about 13 years old. And then from Bob Dylan, I tried to start finding records by this guy named Woody Guthrie, but that wasn't easily done in Britain in the mid-'70s. It was very hard to find Woody Guthrie records. I eventually found a cassette of the Dust Bowl Ballads, but it was on a French label and I couldn't read the sleeve notes. So it wasn't until I came to America in 1984 for the first time that I was able to, go into a record shop and buy a Woody Guthrie record, and likewise a Leadbelly record. So I was aware of them because if you listen to them enough, American singer-songwriters from the 60s and the 70s, you learn Woody's song and Leadbelly's songs by osmosis.
Sure. And Dylan actually mentions them in song too, right?
Yeah, so, not just Dylan, but I mean, you listen to someone like Ry Cooder singing, Bourgeois Blues, Vigilante Man.
Totally.
Arlo, all those guys, Ramblin' Jack, nearly all of them cover and the English singer-songwriters too, show their respect to those artists by covering their songs. So you just kind of like learn them like, it's like mother's milk, really.
Yeah, yeah. And you were aware of like Ry Cooder's records and his versions of those tunes? I
was, yeah. I was very aware of Ry Cooder. By the sort of mid-'70s, I'd kind of connected with that kind of music quite heavily.
Okay, and that stuff was readily available, I guess, right? Like it was.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, I would hear that. You'd hear it on the radio, or you'd see them on Old Grey Whistle Test, or older friends would play the records to you.
Right.
And also, I had a job in a record store as well, so the guys in the record store would play me stuff.
Okay.
Because I was quite young.
Right. When you were a kid growing up, what's the part of London that you grew up in?
I grew up in one of the eastern industrial suburbs. It's called Barking, Barking.
Right. Okay. And so, was there music around the house and stuff? Like, did you?
Not really. No, we didn't. We didn't have a record player when I was growing up. Uh-huh. My parents recognized that I was getting into music, listening to the pop radio in the mornings before I went to school.
Yeah.
And so they bought me in 1969 a domestic reel-to-reel tape machine.
Oh, cool.
I guess they figured that if they bought me a reel-to-reel machine and a couple of tapes, they wouldn't have to keep shelling out for singles, which is pretty smart.
So you would just sit there and like record the radio?
Record the radio, but also I would go and visit friends who had older sisters who had great record collections.
Oh, yeah.
And to me, a great record collection would be Tamla Motown Chartbusters albums.
Uh-huh.
And this was been 1969, so a lot of sensitive young teenage girls tended to have some Simon and Garfunkel records.
Okay.
So I taped all the entire back catalogue of Simon and Garfunkel of my friends' elder sisters.
Yeah.
And Motown Chartbusters volumes 3 to 6 or 7 in the same way. And they became the basis of my music fandom.
So Motown Chartbusters being literally like a greatest hits of Motown kind of thing?
Yeah, basically, yeah. Every year Motown will compile their singles and put them out in the UK.
Okay.
And so they were just brilliant records. Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, Tracks of My Tears on Volume 3, along with Roadrunner by Junior Walker and the All Stars.
Yeah, I love that one.
Yeah, they were just great records, and weirdly that was how I got some of my politics as well, which is a kind of strange occurrence, because what happens is by the time you get to volume sort of 5 or 6,
yeah,
the Jackson 5 are giving way to Edwin Starr singing War.
Right.
And the Supremes are giving way to Ball of Confusion by the Temptations. Something's happened. Something has changed. And the clue is in the record, because also on that same volume is Abraham, Martin and John by Marvin Gaye. Mm-hmm. Martin Luther King has been assassinated. Robert Kennedy has been assassinated. And the African-American pop culture is reflecting that all the way through to Tamla Motown.
Yeah, it is really a heavy time in that kind of music, and the you're right, like just the couple of years between some of the early, I guess you'd call it lighter fare, really did make way for some of that, like that Marvin Gaye stuff is so heavy. Yeah,
but very powerful as well. When you're sort of 11, 12 years old, trying to make sense of this, you're kind of picking up the idea that music should say something more than just "I love you."
Right. was that stuff kind of inspiring you to want to play music, or did you not really think of it that way?
Well, I was already writing songs by that time, although I couldn't play anything. I was just, I sort of did, I was one of those kids who was told to write poetry at school for homework and never stopped.
Okay.
I don't know why all my mates stopped, but I never stopped. So I was kind of writing songs, but not being able to play an instrument. I have to keep the tune in my head from the age of about 12, 13.
Okay, so you were actually considering them to be songs. It wasn't just poetry.
Yeah, I was.
Poetry
Yeah,
homework.
definitely songs. Yeah, there was no context in my life for poetry.
Uh-huh. And did you get a guitar at some point around that time, or did you have to wait?
No, nobody stands in front of the mirror in their bedroom reading poetry.
Well said. Yeah.
It's really simple. I did get a guitar when I was 16. When I left school, my father took me down to the town to buy me a sort of £16 cost nylon strung Spanish style guitar. And the reason why I wanted a guitar was I could hear through the wall of our back room the kid next door playing his electric guitar. And he was a couple of years younger than me. His name was Wiggy. And he taught me to play guitar that summer. He taught me how to play the Rod Stewart songbook.
Oh, cool. And so was he a little older than you?
No, younger. He was 2 years younger than me, but he was about 5 years better than me at guitar.
Nice.
Always, he still is.
Yeah, he's been a mainstay in your career right from day one. It sounds like.
I played a gig with him 10 days ago.
Wow, that's incredible. So did he actually like sit down and teach you how to play, or did you just pick things up?
He did. He showed me where to put the fingers. Yeah, all that.
So you were picking up basic guitar chords and putting all that together.
Yeah.
And what kind of songs were you learning? Like what lent itself to that kind of level that you were at?
Well, the thing about Rod Stewart is he recorded a lot of Bob Dylan songs. He recorded a lot of soul songs. So his songbook was pretty good. And then you could go up to the West End of London, and there will be places you could go, bookshops that only sold music songbooks. And so we got a Bob Dylan songbook home and found that almost all Bob Dylan songs were C, F, and G7.
Very handy.
Almost all of them. And so, I'm talking about his early stuff now. I'm talking about his, sort of
freewheeling, stuff like that.
Yeah, the stuff I really liked. I was turned on to Dylan by the album The Times They Are Changing, which to me was the most raw thing I ever heard. And just like it was, coming from the Stone Age, it just blew my mind. So those were the kind of songs I really wanted to play. So those songs are relatively straightforward to play. They're relatively 3 or 4 chord songs.
Yeah.
Or can be played in a way that makes them sound like you're playing the song properly. So those were, and so when I wrote songs, when me and Wiggy wrote together, we tended to write songs that sounded a bit like a Bob Dylan song or a bit like a Rod Stewart and the Faces song for a long time.
The Faces kind of like, I consider them to be sort of precursors to punk rock in a way. Like they were pretty edgy.
They were edgy, but they were also great songwriters. Ronnie Lane was an amazing songwriter.
Ronnie Lane, yeah.
Ronnie Wood was a great guitar player as well.
Still is.
And if anything, it was the Faces that me and Wiggy really kind of bonded over, because he absolutely loved the Faces. He liked Rod Stewart, but he really loved the Faces, and he kind of, his whole image and his style of guitar was all based on Ronnie Wood.
Nice.
Whereas I really loved Ronnie Lane and Lane's subsequent solo records with Slim Chance. Still the only CD that never leaves my car is a Ronnie Lane CD.
Really?
Because I know any time of day I can put it on and it will just change my mood.
I actually don't know that album. I'm surprised.
No, it's pretty obscure. He made 3 or 4 solo records in the mid '70s, and they're kind of like a very interesting sort of English country and western kind of thing. So it's not cowboy songs, but it's kind of in that same space, a very sort of pastoral kind of. Nobody else has ever managed to do it, really. It's just amazing music, and it has a lot of. It's a bit like if you imagine Ooh La La,
yeah,
and then carrying that on.
So did you ever get a chance to see any of those guys? Like in that era, that was like, Ronnie Wood was probably making his own solo records, and it was post Faces. But we
loved those Woody solo records. Yeah, we really did. In fact, we got together weekend before last at the 60th birthday of our old keyboard player to play some of the songs that were in my little band Riff Raff. And we played some old cover songs as well. And one of them was going to be a Ronnie Wood cover, but we never got around to learning it. But yeah, it still resonates with us. Yeah, Wiggy saw the Faces. I never saw the Faces. Wiggy saw the Faces. We went to see Slim Chance, Ronnie Lane, Slim Chance. Who else did we go and see? Niels Lofgren we went to see. We liked him very much, with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
Sure.
We saw the Small Faces revival. That wasn't very good.
No.
We were just starting to go and see. We saw the Who. We saw the Stones. This would be sort of 75, 76.
And was the punk rock thing happening in London around that time, or did it hit a little later?
Well, where we lived, it hit a little bit later.
Okay.
I think punk rock really was kind of very local and very much in a small clique of people who knew each other. It wasn't really until the Clash went on the White Riot tour. In 1977 that it really opened up, and we went to see the Clash on that tour because they were being supported by the Jam, and we'd kind of hooked onto the Jam at the time because they seemed to be more working class, and they had more of a kind of, they seemed to be rooted in the music that we liked from the 60s, the early Stones, the early Who, the early Small Faces.
In a way that the Clash wasn't?
In a way that the Clash wasn't. No, I mean, the Clash painted words on their clothing, so that was a signal to us that they might be an art school band.
Okay.
And
so
that's a slightly different thing. That might mean that it's all actually just the whole thing is a joke, and they're not really taking it seriously. Okay. Having seen them, however.
Yeah, tell me about seeing the Clash for the first time.
Yeah, we went to the Rainbow, and not only were they amazing live, and they blew the Jam away. The Jam, I don't think, really were ready to play a venue that large.
Oh, okay.
But it was the Buzzcocks were on as well, the Subway Sect.
Wicked.
The Prefects. Some people say the Slits were on. If they were, I didn't see them. Maybe we got there too late to see them. But yeah, the thing about the Clash was they had all the same moves as the Faces, and they were kind of using the same sort of dynamic as the Stones. So it kind of really, it hadn't come across on the records.
Okay.
So the Clash, all of a sudden we were totally into the Clash. We came back and sold our flare trousers, cut our hair, and bought plastic leather jackets.
Yeah.
Or I did anyway. Wiggy kind of stayed looking like Ronnie Wood, and he still does. But that's once you're in there, you're in there.
Yeah, man, in for the long haul. Do you remember any particular songs that would have totally blown your mind that night?
Which mostly it was the first album was all that was out. So the things that really jumped off that to me were songs like Remote Control.
Right.
And Police and Thieves. Police and Thieves really was a bit of a mind blower to me because they were somehow a white band playing reggae and it not sounding lame, which is a very hard thing to do.
It's a very hard thing to do.
But they were doing it by not impersonating it, by taking it somewhere else, by making it spiky. That's what just blew my mind. That's probably the most political track on the whole record, on the first record, and I would argue is the one that points the way for where punk is going to go. That synthesis of black and white culture,
right,
was the seed of it was set with Police and Thieves.
And were you and Wiggy starting to play gigs or anything around that time?
No. We were mostly getting together in my mum's back room.
Okay. So when did that turn into the Riff Raff?
Well, in 1978, we all went to. We wanted to go on holiday together. But we wanted to go somewhere where we could play our guitars. So we went to this studio in the countryside. 1977 that was. 1977, yeah, and. It was really great. We just stayed up all week, and they had a little demo studio there, and we just demoed loads and loads and loads of new songs. I wrote loads of new songs. I was starting to write in a more punky style. I wrote a song called "I Want to Be a Cosmonaut," which had B and F sharp in it, which I'd never ever written a song that had B and F sharp in it, and they were kind of like
that's
crazy chords because and it was a signal that we weren't going to be playing the G. The C, F, and the G7 anymore.
And so that was your first experience in the studio? Was there a producer involved, or did somebody just set gear up for you and you just went for it?
There was the guy who ran the place, a guy named Ruan O'Loughlin. He kind of did a quite good job getting us down on tape.
Okay.
But it was the first time we'd been anywhere where people took us seriously as musicians. he and his wife Jackie took us seriously, and at the end of the week they found us a little gig to go and play all these new songs.
Oh, cool!
Which we kind of came back. We went up there as a bunch of blokes who played music, and we came back as a band.
Yeah. So who's playing drums on that?
A guy named Robert Handley.
Okay. He's
on there. We did an EP for Chiswick in 1978. The name of the band was Riff Raff, and we recorded "I Want to Be a Cosmonaut" and a couple of other songs that I'd written.
Yeah.
And the five guys who recorded that EP were the fellas I was playing with the weekend before last at the keyboards player's 60th birthday.
No way, that's awesome.
Yeah, a lot of fun it was.
Yeah. Well, that stuff sounds great. I was checking it out, and I mean, it's definitely like rough around the edges, but it sounds really good and energetic, and
that's what it was. And it's funny, when we were playing the songs. So we played for an hour. So we played mostly cover versions of songs we used to play back then. Stones, Gloria. We played, loads of stuff.
Yeah.
But when we played the 4 Riff Raff songs from the EP, there was something different about the whole dynamic of the performance. It was almost like we sort of, these songs had an intent with them that was still in us. And when we played them, they had an energy, the like of which I haven't felt, in a band for a long time. It was really interesting. Really? We were just kind of playing the other songs, but these songs we really were. These songs still belong to us.
Yeah, you were connecting in some way that was
very much so, very much so, and so it's sort of it's really surprised me because it is a very long time ago. It's kind of 40 years ago. So. That when we played them, we didn't just play them. We really got hold of them. And I was like, when we were rehearsing them in the afternoon, a couple of times, I just got lost in the reverie of it. And everyone said, "Are you singing the wrong verse?" You sang that verse 3 times. I'm like, sorry. this is taking me back to somewhere I haven't been for a long time.
You're getting lost in it. That's awesome.
It was great. It was awesome. It was like, wow, we really meant those songs. We didn't just play them. We meant them. So
that band, you guys had a sort of a little deal and stuff, right? Like what happened?
Yeah. No, it's only a one-off deal. It was just a nothing big time. They just the Ruan O'Loughlin, the guy who ran the studio in the countryside, was a friend with the record label, so they recorded us and they put us out, and
Yeah.
But if I'd have never done anything else in music, I would be immensely proud of that. To have that record out during punk on Chiswick.
Yeah, man.
That would be my the sort of thing I stuck on the wall in my house and said, yeah, that was me. I'm a soldier.
The next thing that I know that happened with you was suddenly you were kind of going by you had the moniker Spy versus Spy. What brought on that change to be more of a solo artist?
Riff Raff kind of broke up at the end of 1979, and I needed to do something to press the eject button on my previous experience as a singer in a punk band.
Yeah.
So I joined the British Army.
Oh, wow.
As a tank driver in the Royal Armoured Corps.
Really? How was that?
Yeah. Interesting.
I bet.
But the trouble is, when you've driven one tank, you've driven them all, really. It's a bit like that. And one of the reasons there's a number of reasons for it. But I didn't want to be that geezer sitting around in the corner of the pub who used to be in a band. I didn't want to be that person. At the time, a lot of shit was kicking off, and it looked like there might be a World War III, and I'd rather be there and know it than sitting on my arse at home. Another thing was I wanted to get rid of this idea that I could ever be a singer-songwriter, and I thought that was a good way of finally killing it, because everything, it had all gone wrong. And it was just like, the absolute antithesis of that existence. So that I felt would probably, like bleach would get rid of any remnants of that thing. But annoyingly, it just made me want to write more songs. It was really inspirational. And I just kept getting overcome with ideas for songs while I was there. And so I realized that
sweating in your tank.
Well, I didn't really do a huge amount of sitting in the tank. It was mostly just straightforward basic training, really, what I did. Okay. Basic infantry training. But what I realized was that I was going to have to give this one more shot somehow.
Before you joined the army, was it it pretty impossible to eke out a living doing what you were doing, living in London, or was it kind of easier back then?
No, it was just I'd lost control of my fate, really.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
Okay.
And I've been in that band with those guys all that time. The idea of putting together another band and just didn't seem to work. So it was in the army that I'm kind of sort of proud to say I was quite good at it. All the things they asked me to do, I was really good at it, and they almost made me best recruit, but I managed to body swerve them by leaving before they were able to do that.
Uh-huh.
And so when I came out, I was really full of confidence, and I thought, I'm just going to do this. I don't really care what anyone else thinks.
Uh-huh.
I've got these songs. I'm going to plug in my electric guitar,
and
I'm going to get up there and I'm going to do this and let's see what happens. Because if it's almost metaphorically like fixing my bayonet and having one last charge, having run out of ammunition.
Right.
And and seeing what happens. So, I spent a year kind of plotting and writing some more songs. I developed a new style of writing that was more the songs that I was writing were able to be played in the sense that because basically I was the rhythm guitar and riff-raff, so I had to sort of push that up a bit and put more dynamic in my playing.
Uh-huh.
But basically I would be doing the percussion with my guitar and the melody with my vocals. Right. So I had to write songs that worked like that and were short and sweet and smart and sort of made me feel like I was making a contribution to what was going on at the time. And so that's how I sort of ended up playing solo. There was also a bit of reconnection with the sort of Bob Dylan solo thing as well. I was trying to connect with that. And what had happened in the meantime, while I've been in the army, was that the new romantic movement had become fashionable in the UK. And they seemed to be the antithesis of punk rock to me. So I was trying to make music for people who still believed in the ideas of punk rock, that DIY, no difference between the audience and the performer kind of music. I figured that there will always be a minority of people looking for something different, and if I zigged while everybody was zagging, I might be able to find those people. Yeah, and that's what happened.
Well, there's certainly, like, that I can tell, there's nobody else doing that kind of a thing at all. So that Life's a Riot album, that's just sort of you and that gnarly guitar. Is that pretty much how you were performing?
Me, that gnarly guitar and a shitload of echo.
Oh yeah.
I wanted it to sound like the Sun Sessions.
Yeah, it kind of does, like in a weird sort of way. I dig it. So what kind of guitar and stuff were you using? Because I love that sound. What is that?
Electric guitar.
Yeah, like anything you could get your hands on.
No, I had a copy of a Gibson Les Paul Jr. made by a company called Arbiter.
Oh yeah,
which was a subsidiary of Gibson. And what they did was they used old P90 pickups. So it's an original P90 pickup.
Okay. Arbiter made the fuzz face too.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wicked.
So I just had that, really, no pedals or anything, just that and my bare hands.
Yeah.
And basically, Life's a Riot, it was my then live set.
And A New England is on that album, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that had some success, and you had Kirsty MacColl had a hit with that song, right?
Bless her, she did.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Very cool.
Were you involved in her version of it at all, or?
Well, I kind of was, yeah, because she came to see me at a gig. She said, "I really like your song, but I need another verse, and I need it to be regendered." Right. So she said, "I said, yeah, I can do that." She said, "Oh, well, we'll come around tomorrow. I'll cook you breakfast, and we'll get to work with it."
Oh, really?
So I went round on Saturday, and while she cooked breakfast, I wrote the extra verse and changed the gender around, so it was all done. She made me bacon and eggs, and it was fabulous.
Done deal. That's awesome.
Done deal, yeah. But I mean, what she did to the song was just so amazing. I loved it so much, and I still do,
Yeah, she's fantastic.
It's by grace of Kirsty that most people know me, so I'll be forever grateful to her. And I always play the third verse. I never play the two original verses without playing the third verse, and I always give a shout out to Kirsty because I miss her greatly, and B, a lot of her audience were my audience too. So, it's out of respect.
Yeah, yeah.
She was working with her husband then, Steve Lillywhite, who's has a rather different approach in the studio to the one I was familiar with. So when it came back, it sounded fabulously poptastic.
Yeah.
was really, really pleased because it proved I could write pop songs. I didn't need to do it myself.
Right.
Kirsty proved that Billy Bragg songs could sound like brilliant pop songs.
Yeah. Did that kind of influence you to do more stuff like that, or not really?
Not really. No,
Okay.
I was still a bit shy of that in those days because I think she had the hit in '84 maybe. It would take a bit longer. It was really working with Johnny Marr that made me start making a record that sounded anything like what Kirsty did. But although I did work with Kirsty, that was the interesting thing. She's singing on Talking with a Taxman about poetry. She sings on Greetings to the New Brunette.
Okay. And I think I saw her in the video for Sexuality. Is that her in the
She sings
video?
on Sexuality as well. She sings quite a lot on that Don't Try This at Home album.
Okay.
Because that was much more, in her space. I think she sings on Sexuality. She sings on Cindy of a Thousand Lives.
Yeah.
Because Johnny Marr was producing a lot of that, and he was very close with Kirsty as well.
Right.
We were very fortunate to be able to call on her to come and sing on tracks, and she was so great at it.
What was your relation with Johnny Marr? Like through playing around in the UK at the time, was he somebody that you'd met there?
Yeah,
or?
I mean, the Smiths opened a lot of doors for people. A guitar band with sort of brilliant lyrics. So someone like myself, they really did a great service because they made it created a space for a songwriter like myself to make some connections. And I was a huge fan of the Smiths. I just thought they were brilliant. I remember the first time I heard Back to the Old House, just the B-side of This Charming Man, I think, and thinking, they've said in 2 verses what it takes me 5 verses to say in Saturday Boy. That's really amazing songwriting. And so, yeah, Johnny was one of those guys I just connected with. I met him on a few gigs. I opened for the Smiths on their first American tour. And we share a sound man. Grant Showbiz, who was their sound man, also was my sound man. So when we got in the studio, Johnny would come down sometimes. John Porter, who produced Talking with a Taxman, also produced their first album. So he would also call Johnny over to come play, and Johnny's all over Taxman as well. He plays on Greetings to the New Brunette, and he plays the guitar on Walk Away Renee on the B-side.
Okay. And what was Johnny like as a producer? Like, did you guys get along great in the studio, and was it an easy process?
It was an easy process, but he would take the songs away, and then you'd hear them. It wasn't like sitting around with him having input. I mean, when I first wrote Sexuality, it was very clunky. Okay. And he came in with all these lovely chords, and then he took it away and he produced it in such a way that he set the bar for the entire album. Oh, interesting. Which was both a blessing and a curse, because we then had to make the record that could live with Sexuality. And he helped us out. He produced a few of the tracks on there as well. I think he did Accident Waiting to Happen, Cindy of a Thousand Lives. Yeah. Maybe another one as well. Yeah. And so he really helped us on that. It was like a collaboration. It's one of them. I'm not very much a studio person, but that record was one of the ones I most enjoyed. But for a lot of it, you weren't there, you mean? No, I wasn't there, but I wasn't there for the production aspect of it. I was there for the recording and all that. But then Johnny would go up to Manchester with the tapes, and then we'd hear. Subsequently he'd send the mixes down and we'd hear it like that. Wow. Whereas with my own producer, I tended to be a bit more hands-on. Yeah. And a lot of your stuff up to that point was pretty stark too. Like, it was, yeah. You were touring around with, like in the States and stuff, you mentioned with the Smiths and I would imagine other bands too. Did you find, like, how was the difference between the UK and the US audiences around that time? Well, it was very interesting in the US, because in the UK people thought of me as a one-man Clash, whereas in the US people thought of me as a new Woody Guthrie. So I had to kind of find out a bit more about Woody Guthrie, buy some of his records and learn a little bit more about him if I'm going to be. Because I knew enough of him because I was into Bob Dylan, so I knew a bit about him, but I didn't really know his actual biography. So I had to pick up on a bit of that. I mean, the great thing for me was that for a while I was kind of heavily featured in the New Musical Express, and in the 1980s. When college radio was strong, there was always someone at college radio who was reading the New Musical Express. So wherever the Smiths went, any radio station that would play the Smiths would also play me. And the New Musical Express, was that like a weekly rag that came out?
Right.
It's a weekly paper, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like set the tone really for what was going on in the 1980s. So there was 5 weekly papers in the UK, but Enemy was by far and away the most widely read.
Okay. So the Woody Guthrie thing, obviously you dug into it and checked that out. But could you tell me a little bit about how that all happened, how that came together with Nora Guthrie getting you to dig into his lyrics? Like that's quite a undertaking.
That was kind of that began at the 80th birthday party, Woody's 80th birthday party, which would have been in 1992 in Central Park. It was Arlo was on, and Pete Seeger was on.
Yeah.
Michael Franti was on as well.
Okay.
And I was on. And it was there I first met Nora, and she first talked about these lyrics that her father had. They'd written that had no music anymore. And would I be interested in writing some new music from? Now, my immediate thought was, surely this is Bob Dylan's job, not my job. You know, I'm not even an American. These guys have all grown up with Woody. But she sent me some photocopies of the material, and I realized how strong it was. How it wasn't fragments. It was, you know, at the time, I think it was, they had 2,000 complete lyrics. Now they have over 3,000 complete lyrics.
Holy shit.
So I realized that it wasn't like, if I made a record, it wouldn't be like the last few scraps I used up and no one else can have a go. You know,
Right.
I'd just be, you know, chipping a bit away from this towering sort of monument of songwriting, of Woody's unheard songwriting. And also, I came to the conclusion that actually being from another country actually helped, because it gave me a bit of perspective on Woody. I didn't grow up with the little guy, and I tended to see him against the backdrop of American popular culture.
Yeah. I
was one step removed from him, and I think it needed someone like that to take it on, because it's such a big thing. I mean, Nora did ask the obvious suspects.
She did,
and they were all very sheepish about it. I think.
I bet,
because they realised the you know, this is Woody Guthrie. So
it's a big ask.
I was a bit more sort of you know, open to getting to understand him. I was still learning about him, I suppose you could say. And with Nora's encouragement, her generosity, when we got to the archives, that she was, you know, open to anything. She didn't really want to, you know, it to be a particular record. Her problem was that she felt her father was becoming a bit two-dimensional, and she needed someone to record the songs in the archive to challenge the academic idea of who her father was.
It's a great idea, really.
It's a brilliant idea. And she, you know, bless her for thinking up.
How did she convince you to do it? Like, surely you didn't just immediately say, like, yeah, I'll do it. So was there any sort of back and forth about how?
Oh, yeah, there was quite a bit of back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was some back and forth, and I went to New York and into the archive and looked in the boxes.
Yeah. So what form were they in? Like, are they just scraps of paper randomly, or were they books?
Yeah. No. Some of them are in notebooks, but most of them are scraps of paper, randomly, often typed. He was a very good typist, Woody. He did a correspondence course on typing.
Really?
He was quite a fast type. Yeah. But the interesting thing about it is that many of them are annotated by him that day, what he was doing that day, and what, you know, almost like, I'll put this note on you and then stuck it under your hotel door for the morning, as if you're that close to him. I mean, really, like he's writing them and then saying, here you go, pass it across the table to you. It really felt very much like that. It didn't feel like some dusty old archive where you're looking back into the mist of time. It felt very, very immediate.
Wow. And
he was very present. He's very, very present on the page, Woody, in the songs.
So he would type and then he would handwrite some sort of note about. Sometimes
handwrite, sometimes typewrite, but there would be, maybe a thought or a paragraph or what he was doing that day, or some phrases or something at the bottom that talk a little bit about where his head's at, and it was all grist to the mill for me.
Right. And how did you start narrowing it down to the ones that you would actually take on?
That's rather difficult to explain. In fact, you start making part of the good ones, and you realise that actually there's a lot of good ones, and you make sure the really good ones, and there's a lot of them, and then you make a part of the exceptional ones, and then you think, oh dear. So you have to go back and start again and try and sit with Nora and say, look, what about this one? And, how do you feel about this one, And that's how you end up with songs that you wouldn't expect to hear,
Right.
I think that's what Nora wanted. She didn't want more This Land Is Your Land. She wanted
something new.
My Flying Saucer.
Right.
She wanted Ingrid Bergman. She wanted California Stars.
And had she been through it a million times already, or was she discovering it at the same time?
She too was discovering it. There was some that she really, really liked that she asked me to write, and I took them away and I couldn't really connect with them. Because then the thing was, you took them back to England and you sat with them and looked at them and tried to connect with them. And some I did and some I didn't.
Right.
And sometimes it was an immediate process. Other times there was one particular song called Down to the Water that Nora really, really liked, because it was more like a poem, really, but it was about her mother and her elder sister Kathy standing at the beach at Coney Island while Woody went off to war on a boat. It's really, really, really beautiful. But it's just straight. There's no verse, chorus, or anything. It's probably something that Woody just wrote down as a stream of consciousness almost. Yeah. It doesn't even rhyme.
Right.
And it was one of the ones that was giving me a bit of trouble. And then I saw an advert on TV in the UK for Irish Butter, which featured Shane MacGowan from the Pogues singing the old Irish folk song, She Moves Through the Fair. I don't know if you're familiar with it at all.
I don't know that song.
My loved one came to me, la da 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 da. It's a lovely, lovely tune. And I suddenly leapt out of the chair, ran into my office, pulled out the lyrics for Go Down to the Water, and sang them all the way through to the tune of She Moves Through the Fair.
No way.
And came back and sat next to my missus, and she said, what was that? I said, just don't worry, we've now got 21 songs for the project. Don't worry, it's all cool. So it was like that. It wasn't always like that, but for me, it was a joy and relatively straightforward. Some of them I just didn't connect with the lyrics that Nora pulled, but some of them got me straight away, and some that I pulled I didn't quite get my handle on properly.
How long would you say the process was between when you took them away and when you actually wrote the music for them?
It's hard to think now. It was just kind of ongoing thing that, once we decided we were going to do it and we booked the studio, I mean, the weird thing is that Nora, when she came to Dublin, we recorded in Dublin, Nora bought a dozen more songs.
Oh my God.
And I wrote the music for 2 or 3 of them that day. I mean, Another Man's Done Gone.
Yeah.
I just leapt out the page of me and I just wrote the chords for it, and Jay asked me what I was doing, and I showed him how to play it on the piano. Or I showed him the chords and he played it on the piano and it sounded great. And then Jeff came and said, what is that song? And I said, oh, it's this one. And he started singing it, and I knew immediately that he was going to sing this one because he just put so much into it. Obviously really connected with him. So although I'm not actually playing on the record, I am showing the chords to Jay on the guitar. I'm standing with my guitar neck in front of the keyboards so Jay can see it, showing him, because they're slightly weird chords. They're they're diminished chords and stuff like that, and he's following my hands and playing. He was that kind of guy.
Wicked.
He's following my hands and playing it on the piano, and Jeff's got his eyes closed and he's standing opposite us, singing it on the mic. The terrible thing is, though, I told the filmmaker we wouldn't be doing any more recording that night.
Oh,
so she went home, and then she came back in the morning. She was not very happy. So we restaged it without me. So in the film, it's Jeff and Jay, but in the actual recording, it was all 3 of us.
That's amazing. And how did the whole thing with Wilco come about? Like, whose idea was it to bring them in on the project?
That was my idea.
Okay. Were they a band that you had played with around the States?
I knew Jeff. I'd done some shows with Uncle Tupelo.
Oh, okay.
And I really... I really got on with Jeff, and I loved Being There had just come out. That was the most recent Wilco album, and the great thing about Being There is it had so many styles on it.
Right.
And Nora wanted to make a record with lots of different folk singers. She had a list and she went through the list and said, so-and-so could sing this song, so-and-so could sing that song. No, look, the whole point of this record is to get the little guy up front. And if you're going to have a different person singing every song, we're going to lose him.
Yeah, it's going to become about the personalities more than...
It's got to be about Woody. It's got to be about Woody. Let me make the record. Okay, I've got an idea how to do this. Let me make the record. You can choose the title, which she kind of did. You can choose the sleeve, which she kind of did that as well. You can even choose the songs that you don't like, and we'll keep them off. But let me make the record because I've got an idea how to do this. And so I went to see Wilco. They played at the Hammersmith Odeon at the end of the Being There tour. And they'd just been in Ireland for a couple of days in Dublin, and they were saying how much they really liked Dublin. So I said, look, we can record in Dublin. I don't think it's fair that I should have to come to Chicago or you should have to come to London. Why don't we meet somewhere halfway, not literally, but, halfway-ish. And in Dublin, because it's so close, I'll come home at the weekend to see my family. You can have, you can spend your weekends carousing in Dublin. And I think that was probably what sold it to him in the end. That was the, because I knew that Jeff Tweedy would understand the opportunity offered to us by Nora to collaborate with one of the great founding songwriters of the American tradition. Yeah. And Jeff understood it straight away. You didn't have to tell him twice, he got it.
So they weren't trepidatious about the undertaking either?
I don't, by the time I left the Hammersmith Odeon, I felt I'd convinced them, and I never had to go back and convince them again. So I guess any trepidations they had, they overcame.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they did an incredible thing. You got to understand where they were when we were recording. They had demoed Summerteeth.
Okay.
So they cut off from Summerteeth to come and make Mermaid Avenue with me, and then went back and made Summerteeth. I mean, it's an incredible, when I think about it, it's an incredible feat.
Just sticking an entirely different project right in the middle of your main project,
Yeah, it's an incredible thing to do. And, and particularly with it, when you think of the leap between Being There and Summerteeth as well.
It's huge, yeah.
It's a huge leap. And they were in that transition when Mermaid Avenue happened. So, I respect to them for doing that.
Totally. And was there was some kind of thing that happened like with the finished product that you felt wasn't?
It wasn't the finished product. It was the deal that we agreed among ourselves as friends, not anything written down, was that whoever wrote the song would produce it. So the songs that Jeff and Jay wrote, they would take back to Chicago and they would produce. Mm-hmm. And the songs that I wrote, we would produce in London, me and Grant, Showbiz. The producer was the overall producer for the record.
Yep.
When that was all agreed, and there was never any disagreement while we were in Dublin recording at all. Mm-hmm. Everything was sweet as a nut. It was only when we went home and then Wilco said that they wanted to produce the whole record that's when things started to get a little bit difficult.
Okay. So,
because, Jeff had never had a record produced by somebody else. I'd never had a record produced by somebody else either. I think it might have come a little bit out of that. So there was a little bit of, this isn't what we agreed, guys. Come on, let's not mess around now. And whatever problems arose out of that. And I say whatever because I'm not absolutely sure what the cause of it was. Uh-huh. But it was me and, it fell the way we agreed it. Me and Grant produced some of the songs that Jeff's singing on, because he sang Another Man's Done Gone, I wrote that. They wouldn't let me sing Joe DiMaggio because it was about baseball, so they sang it. But we produced that one. Uh-huh. So yeah, that went down, and had Kim not put it in her film, no one would have known about it, and it wouldn't be an issue because it was one of those things that went on for probably like a week, and it wasn't really that big a deal, and it didn't really end up having a detrimental effect on the record, or I would argue our relationship, because when we come to make Volume 2,
which was like a few years later, or
a year or two later,
okay,
because I'd been on the project for a long time before them, I had a lot more songs. Uh-huh. I would say of the original sessions, 2/3 were my songs and 1/3, or it might even be 3/4 and 1/4. But something that sort of, if Wilco didn't really like me, they could easily have said, you just, fill it up with your songs, Bill, and just put it out. We don't want to work with you anymore.
Uh-huh.
But what they actually said was, is it okay if we go in the studio and record some more songs? And I said, yeah, sure, of course. And they said, do you want to come over while we're doing it? I said, no, it's not an issue, really. I mean, you weren't around when I did some of my recording. It's not that an issue. And they come up with the tracks, I would argue, that make Volume 2 more of a Wilco album, because I think Volume 1 is a bit of a leans towards me. But
yeah, I'd agree with that for sure.
Volume 2, because now they've made Summer Teeth, they're in a different place. So it's like, Remember the Mountain Bed, Someday, Some Morning, Sometime. These amazing spacey tracks. They didn't need to do that. If they'd got so upset to the extent of the way the project had unfolded. Mm-hmm. They could have easily have said, we're not really interested, and we could have still put the album out with the spare songs that eventually went on Volume 3. But they didn't. They engaged. They engaged with me.
Yeah, couldn't have been that bad.
Yeah, and more power to them, because I think it made Volume 2 a different feel record because of what they brought to it, the post Summer Teeth sound they brought to it, which really is just just something else altogether. And that's what you wanted. You didn't want to feel the second album was the scrapings, because it wasn't. My only real regret was that we didn't get to tour together. But that's more because we were both of us in different cycles with our touring and record making. I went to tour Mermaid Avenue while they were making Summer Teeth.
Okay.
Then I was off the road while they were touring Summer Teeth. So it wasn't, it was just we were out of sync with that. And there never was any promised dates that we put together and said we'll do touring and all that kind of stuff. Uh-huh. There never was that commitment. I mean, I think, we thought of it, both of us, maybe as a side project. It didn't quite turn out that way.
Right. Yeah, that was a big deal that when it first came out, I remember, and such an important piece of American music history too.
I think everybody was surprised. I think
really,
Graham Marcus hit the nail on the head when he said it was greater than the sum of its parts. Uh-huh. It was greater than me and Wilco and Woody. We'd all somehow the space, and I think there's only one person to blame for that, and her name's Nora.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It was her vision, her generosity, her curation, her commitment to having her father's voice heard that inspired us all to make that great record.
Do you keep in touch with her, and is there any plans to do more stuff at all?
We were talking the other day. We were talking about it being the 20th anniversary this year of us making the record.
Wow! I can't believe it's 20 years.
I know. I'm the same. It's like amazing.
Wow.
So yeah. I mean, the thing about Nora is, once you do something like that for her, you're part of the family.
Right.
So now when something happens, there's an event on, but particularly if there's something going on in Europe, she'll ask me if I'm able to go and represent, and if not, she might go. Or if she's, got something really interesting going on in the US that she thinks it would be interesting for me to have my perspective. Because I have a different perspective about Woody from,
of course,
American artists, I think. But, I'm not bigging myself up here. I think because of my experience, because I'm a European and I'm not an American. Yeah. I have I see him from a slightly different angle. And because of the license that I've received from Nora, and the trust I have with Nora, I don't mind pointing out things that other people don't, might think are contrary to what Woody might have done himself, to suggest those kind of things. So, I think that's why she likes getting me involved in stuff, and I really enjoy doing it. Woody is the godfather of my tradition, the topical songwriting tradition, and to be able to have collaborated with him and to be, to go to Okemah, Oklahoma, where they've laid out, in his hometown, where they've laid out this little park, and all of the stones on the floor are the names of Woody's songs, and to see some Mermaid Avenue songs in there, I can't tell you how pleased that makes me, because I want those songs to be synonymous with Woody. They're not my songs.
Yeah.
Not Wilco's songs. They're Woody songs. We just supplied a new frame, if you like, for them, so that they could be hung up and everybody could admire them.
That's incredible, man. What a thing to be involved in.
Yeah.
I just wanted to talk to you quickly about the Tooth and Nail record.
Sure.
Because to me, I mean, it's not the kind of record that you could have made when you were 21 years old.
Definitely.
So I'm just wondering what your experience was for that session, working with Joe Henry and that whole crew, and how it was different for you, and what you took out of it.
It was the best experience I ever had making an album.
Really?
Yeah, by far. Partly because it took a week. More importantly, though, Joe Henry's bedside manner is beyond reproach. He was completely in charge of everything there, and he just made one or two suggestions that totally changed the whole process. The first one being, don't bring any guitars.
Okay.
Because normally I'll bring an electric guitar and I lead through the songs with the electric guitar. He said, don't bring any guitars. I'll lend you one of my vintage double O's.
Yeah, he's got a few kicking around.
He's got some beautiful guitars kicking around there. And then the other thing he did was he dropped the strings down a whole step.
On purpose? For what reason?
Just to help my voice, because he discerned that my voice had dropped.
Okay.
And that gave me a lot more confidence in my singing.
Interesting.
A lot more confidence in my singing. And then he didn't let the band hear the songs. Well, I hadn't written all the songs before anyway, so they're box fresh, those songs. You know, you're hearing the third or fourth time we ever played them.
I know he likes to work that way, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Did you do it at the house?
In the basement, yeah.
Okay.
Of the
Garfield house?
The Garfield house, indeed, yeah. And it was just great to be with him. I trusted him implicitly.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, he'd been saying to me for a while, you know, we could make an album in a week. And I'd kind of got fed up with making records. The one before it, Mr. Love and Justice, had taken like 18 months, not solid, but on and off, start, stop. I lost focus.
Oh, my God, yeah.
It's probably 2 records that could have gone out, 6 tracks one year and 6 tracks the next year. It's really like, come on.
Yeah, if you spend that much time, you're on a different record by the time you get to the end of that one.
Nobody could remember how much we spent. I'm like, come on, what's going on? You know, it's a great record. I love it. It's got some great tracks on it. But the experience for me wasn't very engaging. I didn't find, it was a bit of a chore.
Yeah.
Partly because I've made so many records. I'm sort of been there, done that. But Joe was a completely different experience, and it really challenged me.
Yeah.
It enthralled me. It engaged me. And
did you find any part of the process particularly difficult, being in the room with those guys and like doing it all live like he would have wanted you to?
No, I didn't feel. I thought they were very conducive, those guys. The way he had it set up, I was in a sound room in a booth with my guitar, and the only person I could see was Jay Bellerose, and that was great because I could lead with Jay with my eyes. I didn't need to be leading with the guitar now. I could give Jay a sort of wave of the guitar when it's up or down, and he's very sympathetic.
Yes, he is.
Jay,
I've made some records with him, and it's quite the experience.
Really an experience, a great experience. I mean, you drop an eyebrow, he's in. He knows exactly what you're saying. So yeah, I felt very, very comfortable with those guys. They're very personable.
Yeah.
Ryan, the engineer, again,
Yeah, he's incredible.
He's incredible. Did a great job on Shine a Light as well.
Right.
Out on the road, setting up, designed the whole rig that we had to allow us to do that. So yeah, I mean, it's Joe's world, and I was absolutely privileged to be invited in for a week to be able to make a record that was better than I ever imagined it might be. I mean, there's a chance I was just going to go to Los Angeles and make some really expensive demos in the back of my mind, and the thing Joe did, which was kind of like exquisitely painful for me, was he didn't let me come home with anything.
Oh, okay.
He said, leave it with us.
Yeah.
We'll email them to you. When we're mixing them. So about 10 days later, around sunset UK time, there'd be a bing in my inbox and there'd be another track.
Right.
I can remember the first one coming through, and I can remember thinking to myself, there is no way this is going to be as good as I remember it. And it was.
Yeah.
And, it elicited responses from people that I'd worked with for years that were just brilliant. One of them said, "Oh, I never knew he could sing," which I just thought was so brilliant. That was so
thanks, asshole.
I was so pleased about that. Whenever I hear it, that was off the top of the first track as well. So whenever I hear that now, when I play the record, I always think in my head, "Geez, this guy can sing."
There is a
Joe, it was Joe's perception of where my voice was, which I hadn't really thought about much. I'm not much of a technical singer. You might have noticed.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's not your thing, but there is a quality.
I'm not much of a technical musician either. You may notice that. I mean, basically, I'm a communicator.
Totally.
In a way that Joe is as well. I think Joe is in a similar way. like that. And I think he was able to realize that with a little bit of adjustment, a little bit of thought about that, rather than let me come in the studio and sort of everyone sit around waiting for me to say what's happening.
Yeah.
If I would be willing to, just for a week to relax that idea and allow Joe to put me in places where I hadn't been before, we might be able to do something amazing. And that's what happened. That's what, that was his promise. Yeah. And that's what he delivered.
I love that it's like the idea of just you jumping into his world, because that's totally what it is.
Well, certainly his basement. It's kind of his world, isn't it? When you go down there, everyone's sitting around there, and it's his guys and his world and his coffee. Brilliant coffee as well.
Ah, nice. That helps. Do you guys have plans to do more stuff? Or like, I know the Shine a Light project was really cool. That was a couple of years ago when you did the train stations and stuff.
Yeah.
Is that?
One of the great things about Joe is that he gets interesting projects and invites interesting people to do them. So I think it's only a matter of time before either he or I get asked to do something that we think the other one might be a really brilliant facet of, and we might be able to do something together again.
Yeah.
It's I've been trying to work with Joe for years.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I've known him since the 1980s.
Oh really?
And I sort of. It was great that we made the record together, but I kept saying to him, Joe, but I want to actually, go out on the road with you and make a record with you in that. And that's so when the idea of Shine a Light came up in the context of writing the Skiffle book, Joe was an obvious candidate.
Yeah, he literally took you up on that idea of
yeah, I mean, well, he was someone who, had great appreciation of roots material.
Yeah.
Real deep understanding of American cultural history in its context that we would be dipping into, and also wasn't someone who was precious in the studio. I mean, he'd made an album where he allowed the sound of the street to come onto the records. I knew that on this we would be trying to take people on the journey by picking up the sounds of the railroad as we went along, and that we would be interrupted, and there would be times when we were singing and things would happen, and he was totally cool with that.
Yeah.
In fact, Ryan put together a 4-way mic stand so that we were miking up, not just Joe and I left and right, but east and west as well. What was going on around us, which you can hear on the record, and I think that adds to the whole idea of the journey.
Yeah, totally. So was the process really quick? Like, you'd pull into a station, Ryan would set the mics up and you would go, or was it
relatively quick? One of the things that is interesting on the American Railroad west of the Mississippi is that there are very few passenger trains anymore.
Right.
In fact, when we were on the Texas Eagle, between Chicago and San Antonio, we were the only passenger train that day.
Really?
And between San Antonio and LA, we were the only passenger train for every other day. So what happens is the majority of railroads in America now is freight. So unlike in Leadbelly's time, when you had to give way to the passenger trains, now passenger trains have to give way to freight.
Okay, so there's a lot of like stopping and pulling over kind of thing.
Well, what they do is when they go to a large, a city where there's more than one platform, they pull the train into the station and hold it there for 40 minutes and use it as a siding, but it also allows people to get off the train and buy a coffee and smoke a fag and,
make a song.
Record an album. Yeah. So when I understood that's how the genesis of the program happened. I was down in Little Rock on another project, and we went to see the midnight train come into Little Rock railway station, and it came in. It just sat there for 20 minutes, and I'm like, well, why isn't it leaving? And the guard explained to me the wait times. I had a look at it was actually the Texas Eagle going up towards Chicago that we saw, and he explained to me the wait time, and I had a look at their schedule online and realized that there's the opportunity here to do some recording on the train, and also providing you make sure that the porter knows you're getting back on.
Right.
He makes sure that you get that third call, the last all aboard, that actually really means all aboard.
Yeah.
And so we were able to do that. We didn't, it wasn't like the train stopped for 4 minutes and we were, No, we had time in most places to do 2 or 3 takes, actually.
Okay. Well, it's a brilliant idea.
It's a crazy idea, Steve. It's a really crazy idea, but it worked.
Yeah, it sure did. Well, thanks so much, man, for talking to me today. I really appreciate the time and all the stories and stuff. It's
my pleasure.
A great history, and it's awesome to talk to you. And also thanks for writing the book. I'm really enjoying it, and I'll get to the end of it.
I did try and write it with an American audience in mind, because I think one of the things that if you don't understand Skiffle, you're not going to understand the Beatles or Zeppelin or any of those bands. You've got to understand the blues boom, the beat groups, the folk boom as well, all comes out of Skiffle. We were not a culture with a guitar in it until Lonnie Donegan turned up singing about the Rock Island Line. That puts a guitar in the hand of every sentient schoolboy in the UK, and the
changes everything.
Changes everything in my country. It does, and deserves credit for that. And that's what I was trying to put across to an American audience. And I'm ever so pleased that in America the book is, relatively well for a British book about a rather obscure musical format, has done quite well. I'm really pleased about that. Yeah, very happy. Yeah. Okay, mate. All the best.
Appreciate the time, man. Thanks.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, that was my conversation with Billy Bragg. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening to it. I hope you dug it as much as I did doing it. It was fun. That guy knows what he's talking about. All right, we'll see you next month for another episode of Music Makers and Soul Shakers. Thank you for listening, everybody. The Music Makers and Soul Shakers podcast was recorded in Nashville, Tennessee at the Hen House Studio. You can visit us online at www.stevedawson.ca. As always, I would like to thank Jeremy Holmes in Vancouver, BC for his help with research, and we'll see you next month for another gripping episode of Music Makers and Soul Shakers.